Comrades, some 90 years ago, in a small room, not larger than this one, and not as well kempt and painted up, a small group of people had a meeting, which the landlord might have noticed was one of those meetings in London, you know. Here today, gone tomorrow, just another meeting of, this time, foreigners speaking a foreign language. So, who were they that was meeting 90 years ago that we here have to remember? It was the meeting of the Second Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Party. The Congress which had such a decisive effect on world history. Now, I cannot think of any other conference or convention or Congress of even the Communist International that had such wide and deep influence. It was the meeting of the Russian Marxists. At that time, they were united in one party, the Russian Social Democratic Party. And Europeans across the continent were saying, well, it's about time that the Russians, like the Germans and the French and the Belgians and the Italians, were going to have a formal socialist party. And they greeted it. They greeted it. Well, even at that, it might not have been so important, except for one development. Instead of it turning out to be a meeting where unity and solidarity on programmatic, political, tactical, and strategic problems were thrashed out and voted upon, as most of the time happens at conference, and unanimously passed, this did not happen. The meeting is well known throughout the world, everywhere where communists gather, as the meeting of the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, when they were together in one party. Bolsheviks meaning the majority and Mensheviks the minority. And instead of, I said, unity being the watchword, it turned out to be the most significant split in the history of the communist and socialist movement. Now, some might have said earlier, and certainly later, was this split necessary? Was it necessary? They all came in united against the czarist autocracy. They came in united against the landlords and the capitalists. What more would socialists want? They all work for all that. Both groupings. So why carry out a bloody split that sends shockwaves throughout the European continent? and caused consternation in the international socialist movement. Blame was cast upon the majority group, the Bolsheviks, for being disruptive. And on the other hand, on respect with the Mensheviks, they appear to be conciliatory and willing to compromise in the name of unity. So what is this conference about that exercised such a fundamental influence on world history? 90 years ago, 1903, sometime this part of the year. See? Why would even a split in one party of all the socialist parties at that time, why would it be so important? Okay. Why? Say, that's what we communists have to consider. If the Soviet Union had not collapsed, if the socialist camp as such was still in existence, I can say with complete confidence that there would have been celebrations of this event. From Moscow to Peking to Cuba, everywhere. Remembering the great day which brought about, laid the basis for the proletarian revolution in Russia and forward from there to other countries. But why was it, why did the split take place? Nobody came out for the Tsarist autocracy, nobody came out for capitalism, nobody came out against a violent revolution. Why did it take place? Were these differences so important? What were the differences there? They were mostly about organization, see. And organization, we learned from Marxism, is subordinate to politics. An organization is supposed to facilitate politics. So what happened there? See? There were two vitally different versions as to how the organization should be run. One version that is very popular today and was popular then was that everybody who wants to be a member would sign a card and pledge allegiance. In some organizations, you don't even have to do that. You just have to signify by hand or by a contribution that you're a member and that you agree. And that, you know, you attend as many meetings as you can when you care to come to them. And you can come to a convention if you got the fare and listen to the speeches and so on. That's how most organizations are conducted. I will say that the German Social Democratic Party was much more disciplined, but apparently not as much as the group that was headed by Lenin required it to be. See? Lenin's group said that having just members who agree or sign a card or occasionally give a pledge, those are not real members. They may be members of a broad organization of sympathizers, but to be members of a party that hopes to bring about the socialist revolution, much more is required. It requires a strong, disciplined party where the members are accountable for their activities, where they don't participate in the activities and are not accountable, and not even the leaders are accountable, such as a weak, loose organization not worthy of a party that hopes to overthrow the most monstrous despotism in European history, to overthrow the Russian government. No. You need a party that not only can propagate against socialism with Marxist learnings and teaching, you need also to teach them to operate illegally against bourgeois democracy and to utilize that bourgeois democracy not to elevate it, but use it as a means to push the socialist revolution as against the proponents of bourgeois democracy. This flew into the face of the older leading comrades, and especially one, Plekhanov, who was considered the father of Russian Marxism, and who in 1883, as long ago as that, more than 20 years ago, before this very meeting that was taking place, he had organized it, and he had written extensively on Marxism and was a recognized authority on Russian developments and on Marxism in general. And he was on the other side of the fence as against this younger group led by this young man, Lenin. To oppose Plekhanov, which is his name, would immediately get you in bad reputation with all of the leading socialists in Europe who knew his name and who stood as a symbol of struggle against Russian despotism and for socialism. So as we can see, it took some doing in order to try to put Lenin's conception of a party across, which was a new conception, not altogether, because Lenin also brought up the history of the Communist League in 1848, when Marx was a participant in the communist movement at that time. And if Lenin was following it careful, as I'm sure he could have even brought up that the organization seemed to be so disciplined that when Marx didn't write the Communist Manifesto on time as directed, they threatened to expel him. You see how far discipline sometimes went. So we may see what it is. What is it that has made this conference so significant? Was it really necessary to have this kind of organization so disciplined, which seemed to cast away hundreds of thousands from its ranks? It seemed to make it sectarian rather than all-embracing. Yet, what made it possible for Lenin and his group, by assiduously and energetically pushing this point of view, to get a majority at the conference. Again and again, Lenin brought up the conception that the working class is a disciplined class. It's not the petty bourgeoisie that has a great many different and conflicting interests, many of them laudable. But the proletariat, by virtue of the fact that it is in large-scale production, or even small-scale production, the proletariat is disciplined by the machine. They come into work, they punch a clock. That's not what free intellectuals do, who write when they can and will, and don't live up to deadlines for a newspaper, even in Workers' World, and have a very disciplined editor, see. Yes, again and again, Lenin hammered away at the need for a proletarian party. And the fact that Russia was a country where there was a minority of proletarians, and that the vast majority were peasants, who, according to the characterization of Marx, are petty bourgeois. Of course, then said always in a sympathetic sense, see. But peasants are peasants because they want their own plot of land and have private property interests. It is the proletariat that is the decisive class in the struggle for the control of the means of production. You need a strong, disciplined organization to deal not only with the intellectuals, but with the millions and millions of peasants, with the middle class, and beyond that, with the bourgeoisie. The other way, to have a soft organization, was to get away from this conception. And the conception that would be most prevalent would be of the social democratic type prevalent throughout of Europe, which is a voluntary organization where more or less the members do what they really want to do. If they want to be disciplined, okay. If they don't, then they can make contribution, it's just as well. That view did not prevail. And not. The struggle over what kind of organization it should be ultimately determined not so much the organization, that for sure, as the political program of the party. Because for a party that has such a lofty position on organization, it goes without saying that it would not only be rigid in organization, but also in its program, though in its political program, though it would be flexible in the highest degree on tactics and on strategy. For that reason, this conference lasted a long, long time, see. Some leaving early, others staying, but those who left were not counted. It's those who stayed to the last day and fought the battle. And who cared at the time? Who cared what was going on? Some newspapers from the Social Democratic Party of Germany mostly, of France, the Okhrana, or the secret police of Russia, they sure were present there, that's for sure. But aside from all that, it did not seem to be the great historic development which it turned out to be. It turned out to be because they found that a new conception as to how a party should be run. If that party hopes to be the decisive element in the overthrow of the oppressive and exploitative capitalist system. The capitalists are disciplined by virtue of the right of profit. They dare not be negligent of that. See? So how did it go from day to day at this conference? There would be intermissions, and delegates would talk outside more than they would talk inside, get into small groups and argue night and day. See? A latecomer to the conference was somebody by the name of Leon Trotsky. He was a young man when he came, 10 years younger than Lenin, full of fire, full of revolutionary enthusiasm, and especially enthusiastic about Iskra, the paper of the Social Democratic Party, really controlled by Lenin. And when he came, as would be the case in our organization, were it then to be split, both the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks trying to get a hold of him. But the Mensheviks got there first. And who told them how great his articles were, which they might have been at that time, and how he so very well fitted in with the grouping led by Plekhanov, Martov, and others. But having been a little late, the Leninists nevertheless did get to Trotsky and pulled him over into the corner of Lenin, to which he had wanted to come in the first place, but got sidetracked by men of great distinction, Plekhanov, Martov, Axelrod, names that he revered, having read in the Social Democratic press about them. And for a while he seemed to be very much with Lenin and his group, but that was very, very short-lived. And one of the things that made it so short-lived, see, was that after conferences, you try to get the new contact and talk to them. And when the Bolsheviks got a hold of Trotsky and they began to hammer away at the Mensheviks and using some of the language, street language against them, language which was horrifying, against Plekhanov and Martov and all the others, and he recoiled in horror. Against it. Why, the more Lenin was painted not in rosy and revolutionary colors, but as a dictator. Whereas the Mensheviks, it was all freedom and peace and good friendliness. See? So that notwithstanding that Trotsky participated in the conference and heard very moving speeches by the Bolsheviks, nevertheless the pull was in the other direction. But Plekhanov, Axelrod, and others, and above all Martha, see. So as the conference built and became more, this struggle became more vicious, all the participants becoming hidebound, where there was no room, to negotiate or to move. It seemed to be like two Chinese walls. You can't get by it, see? You can't No middle ground left. Trotsky would have sought the middle ground, but there wasn't any. It was either with the Mensheviks or with the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks were as hard as nails. They wouldn't give an inch in discussions. According to others, they vilified individuals, brought up all sorts of things about them and so on. Oh, maybe. The Mensheviks did their part as well in a different way. See? It's what happens in a lot of organizations, only the form is different and the content is different. The organization, the conference ended in a split with the Bolsheviks one way and the Mensheviks in another way. And Trotsky was with the Mensheviks, although he agreed with the very stern explanation of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the uncompromising nature of the struggle that had to be put up against the bourgeoisie, the aristocracy and the landlords and so on, so that the political program, as the Leninists argued, was more to his liking, but what he did not like is this part about dealing with those who were dissenters, especially when they were friendly to you. Haven't we all noticed, haven't we noticed this in organizations throughout? They saw, and the class struggle is soft, that everything seems to be easier with the organizations, and friendship and tactical problems seem to sink into oblivion, but comes a decisive hour when everything is let loose. There is a split on principle. Now, in later years, Trotsky was to say again and again that after the split was over, see, he noticed one thing: there were so few workers in the conference. Well, it's not to be wondered at. It's held in Europe, not in Russia. Nevertheless, there were 3 workers there. That's something coming from either Moscow or St. Petersburg or anywhere, just coming there. There were 3 workers. And of the 3 of them, where everybody was pulling in one way or the other, each trying to get one of the workers on their side, because having the worker in an organization which calls itself socialist and which promotes proletarian revolutionary class struggle, getting work is important, especially if they're there at this conference. And Trotsky did notice that the 3 workers, they all went with the Bolsheviks. Now that might have bothered Trotsky a lot, since he was all for the workers, but the workers themselves decided that they would be with the Bolsheviks. And Trotsky was to say in later life that this was an anticipation of the development of the Bolshevik Party as a proletarian party, as a party of the working class. See? Now, that's so much for it. By the way, Lenin, after the conference was over, see, he set himself down, or if he did, I don't know what he did, but he wrote it all up. Wrote up an estimate of maybe 30 or 40 pages, so that the workers in Russia or anywhere else would know what happened according to the way he explained it. Now, the Bolsheviks, to my knowledge, they had more literary people, but they had more of an estimate, general estimation as to what the Congress was all about, you see. Well, Lenin didn't just give an estimate. He wrote down who said this and who said that, and how many voted one way and how many voted another way. It was a detailed analysis as to what happened. And that showed Lenin as the organizer and the most important literary figure. Others can complain about Lenin's style, but when it came to giving all the detail and sitting down and writing it all, that was something, see? So that if by any chance the Bolsheviks sneaked in an analysis of what happened at this conference, which split, well, they had Lenin's. And it's written in polemical terms, and it's so appealing to workers, it's hard to see how they would not be influenced by it. But even more importantly was that he did sit down and write it out and not just make generalizations, see, which is what the Bolsheviks did. And they had brilliant writers who could write interesting and illuminating articles, but they were not the detail, they were not the hard facts, the hard knocks against the opposition, which he called opportunists most often. See? Now, at this time, you probably want to know where Stalin was. Well, Stalin was, of course, with the Bolsheviks. That's an important fact, He's not one of those who I believe, if he was there, I'm not exactly sure, who would make florid speeches. He was not capable of that. But he was known to be an activist in underground activity on behalf of the party, carrying out dangerous missions inside Russia, getting imprisoned, getting out, getting in. He had, I would say, an eminent reputation as being of the core of the party, somebody you would value very highly. Now, sometimes we, especially myself, always bring out the fact that he came from an oppressed nationality, which is, in Lenin's estimation, of course, very, very important. See, but there was more than his nationality involved. He was the son of an ex-serf. His family's, his antecedents were serfs. And that was the Russian peasantry. Now, if you picture yourself in a meeting of a half a dozen of the old Bolsheviks, with Lenin and Kamenev and several others, they were all from either the privileged classes or the lower classes, but he was the only peasant there. He was the only peasant of the leaders. And we should know, and I think that we should remember, see, that for years and years, the Narodniks, the popular party, they lived by nothing except the peasantry, The peasantry was everything. God gave us the peasantry who gives us our daily bread. It's the peasants who plow the fields, who gather the harvest, to bring the fruit. It's the peasants. Thank God for the peasants. It's the peasants who will free us if we only know how to organize them. Those were the middle class populists who had that. So that there was a reverential feeling for the peasants, not necessarily the Georgian peasants, but all of them, and especially in Russia, which was a vast mass of peasants. So that when you talk about Stalin, you know that he was the one leader in that small group of Bolsheviks who was a peasant, and a Georgian peasant, and was respected for his activities and his discipline. Now, others might have called him a hand raiser, one of those who could be relied upon to vote with the Bolsheviks all the time, and so on. Now, according to some accounts, he was disloyal to his comrades, in prison and out, and so forth and so on. Maybe that's true. Maybe his later life seems to support that. And notwithstanding his peasant background, he was the one who carried out the absolutely incredible collectivization scheme which ruined hundreds of thousands of millions of peasants and brought them nothing but starvation and hunger and homelessness. But that was Stalin in later years. But in the time earlier, that was Stalin, the disciplined party member. Stalin, whom Lenin wrote to Gorky, he said, "I've met a Georgian who is a splendid comrade." So that's how it was, see, at the time. Now, what happened shortly thereafter, see? See, when Trotsky didn't go along with the Bolsheviks, and while he went with the Mensheviks, he wasn't comfortable with them because the political program was with Lenin. The hard line on proletarian revolution and proletarian class consciousness, that was Lenin's party. The other one was softer. They talked more softly. That wasn't the only thing. But they acted differently too. There were more like-minded people among the Mensheviks. More who didn't take things seriously, as did Trotsky on the political program. And so while he broke with the Bolsheviks and didn't stay with the Mensheviks, see, he was sort of like a loose cannon, not very much in any place. And he had a great deal of self-confidence in himself as a masterful leader. And we can't blame anybody for thinking what they are, but sometimes they could be mistaken about themselves too. Well, it wasn't too long from 1903 until 1905. See, 1905. 1903, the founding Congress of the party and the split. In 1905, the revolution breaks out. not to the surprise of everybody, but the surprise that it took so long. And it was hailed everywhere, especially in Europe and also in America. At last, the Tsarist plutocracy is over with, see. And now the revolution will bring not only peace, it'll bring democracy and everything else, see. Now, of course, that revolution was crushed in blood. But one of the things that happened, though, that gave Trotsky a great advantage, see. He became the chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet. 1905 revolution brought to the fore the spontaneous development of Soviets, workers' councils. And being the brilliant orator and that he was, you know, he got into the Soviet, and before long, not too many days, he became the chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet, the most important one, and the place where the revolution was taking place. Oh, you couldn't have found a more important niche for yourself, and couldn't have gotten higher or further than that. But being Trotsky, the orator, one who could also be rude and push himself, you know, not one who was deferential and so on, but one who was supremely confident of his abilities and what he could do. And so he became chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet. Now, of course, the Soviet, as it was in 1905, see, what happened to it was that as soon as the strike wave began to wither away, the Tsarist police moved in and dispersed the Soviet and arrested the leaders, including, of course, Trotsky. And Trotsky was arrested and convicted and sent to Siberia. But not long thereafter, Trotsky had a spectacular escape, like in one of those movie dramas, you know. Very much like it, see? He escaped and came to Europe, see, back. So that he had a reputation for himself, not just as a waverer or someone who wasn't with the Bolsheviks, but had a great reputation. And also, he got himself an undue disadvantage with Lenin. See? Trotsky came to St. Petersburg right away. From wherever he was in Europe, he got back to St. Petersburg. The police notwithstanding and so forth and so on, or where you get the money or how you do it, he was always able to do it, as were others. He got back and came to the right place at the right time and was doing the right thing, being chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet. And now Lenin was the head of the party. And he just had to stay where the party center was. Not a very comfortable position. Sort of isolated. I so deeply appreciate Lenin's difficulty. See? He was not the center of attraction. And find it difficult of comrades coming back from the exile and so on, and everyone having his tale of woes and so forth and so on, and what do we do now that the revolution is crushed, you know? So Lenin was isolated for a part and in an uncomfortable position, see, not be where the action was. And Trotsky was right at the center. And when he came back, it gave the appearance of, well, he was as good or as strong, as popular and knowledgeable as Lenin. In fact, you could say, although I wouldn't really agree to say that, well, he had done as much as anybody in the revolution, as much as Lenin, see. And he could vie with him as the man of action, the man of oratory, and so on. And Lenin was building the party, see. I often feel, only because I'm a party leader, see, I appreciate Lenin's position. Like you sometimes go to a great demonstration, everybody's there except myself, and you want to know what happened and so on and so forth. You're not in it. You got to depend on the reports and so forth and so on, and who knows what. If you're not really part of the action, you're not in it, see. So there's a number of those that I remember, and how difficult and how delicate is the problem of getting the information, and also to assess it very carefully with due consideration for all comrades involved, and move on to the next stage so that there aren't any fissures, any difficulties under the circumstances, see. So Lenin, for a while, his star seemed to have sunk somewhat, and Trotsky's was way up. His popularity soared soon after he came back, after his spectacular escape from Siberia. So it was not very much that Lenin could do, either by way of winning him or by way of polemicizing with him. And the conference that followed in 1906, thereafter, see, also made it difficult for Lenin on the question of how to deal with the peasantry. Again and again, what kind of a government would be if the revolution, once the revolution is over. And Trotsky seemed to have developed a position that was more strongly proletarian, see, more strongly proletarian than Lenin's. Lenin held out a more abstract formula on what the upcoming state would be like, see, after the revolution. And he envisioned a greater participation of the peasantry, but that, of course, the party of the working class would be leading it. It's a really not very significant development, theoretically, but Trotsky did make a great deal out of his theory of the permanent revolution, a phrase that he took from Marx. And the revolution, permanent revolution, meaning that a revolution will go on until all class vestiges will be gone. That the overthrow the bureaucracy, you overthrow the landlords, you overthrow the bourgeoisie, you go on to a socialist revolution and make it worldwide, and after only that is the complete victory, see. It's an alluring program, and he worked it out together with a bourgeois by the name of Parvis. And it created some problems for Lenin, but being the head of the party, notwithstanding the victories that Trotsky had piled up for himself, the party nevertheless, as a party of workers, was being built in Russia, both legally and illegally. And while it wasn't as romantic as making an escape from Siberia, it was nevertheless to be proven to be more decisive in how the party would win the working class. See? It wasn't a little further in 1906 that Trotsky, sensing himself not to be with the Mensheviks really are not willing to put his politics first and his organizational problems second with the Bolsheviks, he began to organize an independent grouping. You know, in politics, there's nothing so alluring as to have an independent grouping. Independent Democrats, independent Republicans, independent liberals. But in reality, there's no independence, It's a wrong term in the first place, see. But he built a grouping called that the Organization Committee, with a number of people who are like-minded or appear to him to be like-minded. Now, of those that were with him, I would only give one name because I recommended his book to all of the comrades. It's the book by Ryazanov, Marx and Engels, and it's an excellent book. However, he hadn't written it at that time, but wrote it 30 years later. But he was with Trotsky, see, and several others. And Lenin excoriated this committee. It said it's nowhere. Could I have that small? So he organized this committee that's supposed to be like the buffer between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And during its period of existence, they proved themselves to be a non-entity, not being able to accomplish one thing or another, and certainly not in Russia. In the meantime, Lenin, grinding away at building the party of workers in Russia, legally or illegally. So the first time that the Tsar agreed that there be some sort of a legislative body to, after all, the revolution was defeated, but they threw some crumbs to the people. They can have some sort of a legislative body called the Duma, in which workers could be elected. And as it happened, see, the more militant ones would be appalled at, being involved in it, that it was a crumb to cover up the lack of democracy in Russia. We shouldn't participate in it. It smells bad, and so on and so forth. But Lenin took another position. He said, there's a way open to get elected, and we can do it. We try it. And Lenin fought hard, denouncing those who would not participate as liquidators of the party, as fearful to get involved in a struggle. And the result was that the Bolsheviks elected, I'm not sure, either 5 or 6 of them, almost all, and created a sensation that the Bolsheviks were able to get people elected and to get up in the Tsarist forum and to denounce the Tsar. That was something that workers could appreciate, because they could see that they voted for them, and they can read the Tsarist press and see what the Leninists were doing inside the Kremlin. Wow, that was something. Getting them elected. Well, that might not have impressed the Organization Committee, as it was called, but in Trotsky's group. The Mensheviks also got some elected, but it was a different situation with them. The Bolsheviks were the ones that were persecuted more. But it showed one thing. the party was being built all over Russia, legally and illegally. And this election, which meant nothing, you know, and the Tsar abolished it no sooner than it was proclaimed, but nevertheless, a Bolshevik could get up anywhere and say that he was a member of the Duma. Wow! That's even higher than saying he was a member of Congress, you know. Something like being a senator, you know. That carried a lot of weight if you went into a factory and said, well, you know, I am now a Duma member. Even though you couldn't do much for them, it meant a great deal. It meant that the party was being built, that the party was strong among the workers, and that recognition had to be given to it. Now, among those who worked hard was, of course, Stalin. As a very well-known activist, strong in the party, respected there. Might not have been very popular with the literary people, but that's the bread and butter of party politics. Those who work hard for the party. Those who build the party. You can take the oratory very much and like an ornament. It's great if you have it, but you can do without it if you can elect somebody to the Duma to represent the workers and take the chance of getting sent to Siberia or getting killed in the process. As many did. Many died in exile in the Siberian wastelands. Many escaped, came back to Europe, like the Trotsky. So we get to this part that deals with Trotsky. Now, we have been Trotskyists for a long time, and we're not about to underestimate him. We want to put everything in historical focus. The difficulty in defending Trotsky was most difficult during the period of when Stalin was out with his frame-ups, framing up everybody in sight who had anything to do with the revolution. That's a different period. We now are in a period where we want to recast everything the way it was without fear of intimidation by the CP as it was in the 30s, very much acting as goon squads in many ways to any opponents, especially of the left. But Stalin's period was very strong and a pillar of the party. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Now, as things were moving and the party was getting stronger and the feverish and dramatic rise of Trotsky was declining somewhat, not having really a base among the workers, but being a great publicist. He would write for many papers in Europe. Can speak fluently at least 2 more languages. Even visited the United States. He everywhere was a great publicist for the revolution as against the Tsarist autocracy. And it was to nobody's advantage to attack Trotsky publicly, especially in the bourgeois press. And he, on the other hand, confined himself to defending the revolution without attacking the Bolsheviks either. What took place in the South, in the Russian press, was constant polemics between the groupings. But they were more in the nature of, as I get to understand it better and better, internal stuff. And so, as time progressed, Trotsky's grouping was getting nowhere. The Leninist Bolshevik grouping was making progress in Russia, but not only in Russia. Trotsky also had his great admirers. No, I mean, Lenin had his great admirers. Such as later the ambassador Kalante, first woman ambassador for from the Soviet Union. Eminent publicists like Litvinov and others. The Bolsheviks were not without their own intellectuals. They also cultivated them. And know the great length to which Trotsky went to cultivate Gorky, who was politically far apart from Lenin, but always Lenin had an affinity to get him in to do things and to praise him and so on and so forth. When Gorky, like most of the intellectuals, they stay with the revolution, but they've got their own ideas as to what a party is or what the revolution is about, but it's an ally of one sort or another. We must skip a little and go a little further to an important development finally a few years later, see. That is important in the life of the party and in the life of Trotsky, Stalin, and Lenin, of course, who was the leader of the party and who was the principal actor on the historic stage, even though it may not appear to be in the public view. Trotsky embarked upon a maneuver of a sort to elevate his conception of what the struggle should be. And so he gathered the idea that of all the groups that were together in Russia, see, the Bolsheviks, his group, the organization committee, several other groups, and together call a conference and invite the Bolsheviks too, and he would put his program forth so there would be a unified social democratic party. See? In other words, he called a conference which he knew the Bolsheviks wouldn't attend because most of those people he called for had either been people who were expelled from the party, people who were opposed to the party, who took some revolutionary ideas from Lenin and cast others aside, and so on. So it was a motley group that he got together, but it gave the impression, well, at last the Russian Social Democratic Party would be united, and if only the Bolsheviks would attend, it would all be unity. This is what is needed in Russia, not two socialist parties, but one socialist party, like in Germany or in France. See? You can always have that argument. The unity mongers are there and often the loudest, and to speak about it just when it's most impossible, see. So Trotsky called his conference, and I don't know whether he actually expected the Bolsheviks to attend, but they didn't. But his biggest surprise, however, was that nobody else came. Nobody else came. And thus he was left holding the bag. He, the master orator, the one who could mesmerize hundreds of thousands of workers at demonstrations, who could write so brilliantly and publicize the Russian Revolution abroad and get recognition all over the world as an attempt to undermine the Bolsheviks, and called this conference. Lenin denounced it, and notwithstanding all that, the conference ended up as a nullity and as a howling blunder on the part of Trotsky. And it would be a blunder on my part to go on further. I want to take a 10 or 15 minute rest to give the rest of the talk. Is that all right?